are likely familiar with, given the media coverage around it. The particular article I'm going to read from is from Fox KTVU News, and the headline reads, "Oakland police officer shot and killed in the line of duty." This was last Friday. An Oakland officer was responding to a burglary at what has only been described in various media outlets as a cannabis facility in the 400 block of the Embarcadero in Oakland, California. I have some knowledge about this story in this case, but I'm going to go ahead and just read a little bit from this article. Sources have confirmed with KTV News at least 2 suspects have been arrested in the early morning burglary that preceded the death of an Oakland officer. Oakland police sources tell KTV News that multiple arrests have been made in connection with the burglary. They say that they expect more arrests will be made, but at this time, there's no official word that the person who fired the gun that killed Officer Lee has been arrested. Lee was killed early Friday when intercepting a burglary at a cannabis dispensary around 4:45 a.m. in the 400 block of Embarcadero, that's near 9th Avenue. He was then pronounced dead at Highland Hospital in Oakland at 8:44 a.m. City leaders, city departments across the state have shared condolences over Lee's killing. A little bit of background about this incident. Officer Lee had approximately 4 years on and was assigned to a specialized unit. He was responding to a burglary, and from information that has been reported and information from folks that I know within law enforcement, this particular facility was broken into and burglarized around 1 a.m. And then media outlets had reported that law enforcement secured the facility, and that can mean different things, and happy to go down that rabbit hole if anyone cares to. But then the well, they're calling it a dispensary in this article, but I'm not really sure if that's the case, and I'm not gonna put out any official word. But they then responded back to the facility when it was being hit a second time, and that's when Officer Lee responded. He was working in plain clothes in an unmarked car, and as suspects fled, they fired multiple shots, striking Officer Lee. That's the story that I'm sharing today. This obviously brings up a lot of different conversations and a lot of different viewpoints. I'm thankful that we have this platform to discuss it. I'm thankful that we have correspondents that have different points of views and different optics around this story. I'm also thankful to Jason Beck for reaching out and allowing me to contribute today and share the story. I am former OPD. I worked there from 2008 to about 2014, and then I went to San Francisco PD, but I didn't know Officer Lee myself. A lot of former OPD officers that I reached out to do and did know him. It's reported that Officer Lee was from Saigon originally and then moved into Oakland. He's actually from Oakland. And this is the first Oakland officer lost since Mark Dunnigan, John Heggie, Irv Romans, and Dan Sakai back in 2009.
Man,
it's a sad story, man. Glad we got to hear it from your perspective.
Yeah,
too, Chris. But there's levels, like layers to this one, man. An Asian immigrant protecting a black business, going down in the line of duty, and we hear a lot about the inaction of police officers, especially in Northern California, and then you have a story like this. It really hits home, man. So yeah, big love out to the police officers' family and friends out there in the whole Oakland community. I know everybody's reeling from this one.
100%. And one has to wonder too what this is going to do to the overall morale in the police force when it comes to enforcing. Like, this is the first time that they actually, to my knowledge, that they actually chased a suspect from any of these types of cannabis facilities and any of these types of burglaries that have been menacing the cannabis industry for a number of years now. And so, Chris, I mean, it has to lower the morale. I mean, I think in that article or in another article, the police chief was saying, hey, you know what, City of Oakland, you should probably get rid of all of your cannabis businesses because we can't protect them.
I've always said a couple things to respond to your question. Yeah, morale is going to be affected here. But again, I think I've said this before multiple times, and I really do believe that we have a retail theft problem in the country. We have a retail burglary problem in the country. We have a retail robbery problem in the country. It is not specific to cannabis. Near Lake Merritt, a 7-Eleven guard was recently shot and killed, armed guard. So people are targeting businesses with things within them that they consider valuable. I mean, even the French Laundry was hit years back, right? So if it's valuable, people will come for it, period. This is, one of my hesitations to share stories around crime within the cannabis community is I don't want the naysayers to be able to pick up and say, aha, see, cannabis brings in all these problems. I don't, I'm a subject matter expert in cannabis security, and I don't believe that to be true. These facilities have, various requirements that other retail businesses, commercial businesses don't have, and they have, specifically, let's look at security camera systems that law enforcement absolutely does rely on to investigate crimes unrelated to cannabis. I give hit and run as an example all the time, and I encourage cannabis businesses to keep a log anytime they interact with law enforcement and provide value to them. So, that's part of my hesitation with sharing stories around crime and things like that in the industry. However, it is a prevalent problem in this industry as well and needs to be addressed. And there's multiple ways to do that, in my opinion. My hope is that municipalities will take a hard look at how they spend and distribute grant dollars that are meant to bring value to these small business owners, period, that are struggling on multiple fronts. Respectfully, some folks struggle with understanding where to spend money, and what's a good investment. People are not security experts and they don't know. And so I've seen people spend, copious amounts of money and it bring no value. I've also seen municipalities be irresponsible with grant funds and not only how they distribute them, but the barriers to entry that they create in order to just get your hands on the funds. And so, there's a lot to unpack here, and, we've got 10 minutes left in the show, and I don't want to bogart the conversation, but I will just say again, my hope is that municipalities really take a hard look at the resources that they have and how they can distribute those resources to business owners to prevent these types of things from happening.
So I'd like to take a quick little stab at this. So first of all, my deepest condolences not only to the Oakland Police Department, the Oakland community, Tuan Lee, his family, but also to the cannabis industry, which we like to say cannabis has never killed anybody. But here is the byproduct of a regulated industry that is now become systemically targeted for property crimes. And so there's no winners in this. It is true that there has been cries from the industry around law enforcement generally being under responsive to some of these property crimes. And here's a perfect example of why, if you were a law enforcement line staff, the number one rule is to come home alive. It is also true that there doesn't seem to be a state database, and I've heard this from the police in Santa Rosa and the chief there, that these crimes tend to be committed by professionals, roving bands of marauders that go from market to market, and that the methods for these crimes are not being accumulated at a state level to allow local law enforcement to tap in and to understand trends that might affect their areas. The other thing that I think is a real problem is we don't have any visibility about where the money that is realized as local tax revenue, where it's being spent in respects to loss prevention and law enforcement. And so when you have clusters of cannabis businesses like you have in Oakland, like you have in Santa Rosa, like you have in Los Angeles, if we can't see that the tax revenue that's being collected in those markets is being spent on loss prevention in those markets, that's a real problem. And so not having a state repository, a database that's facilitated through the DCC and that supports local law enforcement shows us that there's ample room for improvement. And hopefully we can avoid things like this ever happening again. It's also, in the same breath, something that newer adult use markets need to be paying attention to. This is a mature market issue, and if we can take the know-how and the painful lessons that have resulted from some of these incidents, and we can apply those to markets that haven't yet experienced this kind of loss prevention, I think that could be a real valuable thing that California can lead the charge on.
A lot of great points there, Yarrow. And the one thing I do want to say is, there's always a risk that comes with that job. Also, you might go home, or you might not make it home. The same goes for folks that sign up, get enlisted, and join the military. So I hate to. I'm not trying to minimize anything about what happened, but on the flip side of that, like, it's part of the job too, right? If when you're donning that gun and badge, like, there is a chance that you might not go home. You might not see your family again. So just want to give out some big love to everybody who has the courage to, put on that uniform. And I don't think that I don't think it should ever be a morale buster or something to put down any morale when you choose to operate as a police officer. So I always kind of cringe when I hear like, oh, I'm going to kill morale. This is why cops don't go in and do their job. Like, that's what your job is to do. Your job is to serve and protect. And
I agree with that.
Absolutely.
I agree with that.
Put on that uniform.
And I would say,
When you
Rico,
go into this, signing up for that. That's what you're committing to when you go into law enforcement or any kind of public service job. Of course, this is really, and by the way, sorry I'm late, but it's New Year's Day and it was Luke's first one out. And so we were
turn up
incredibly late.
Yeah.
Slept right through the alarm.
Yeah.
It's the fancy wardrobe.
Yes.
I like it.
But I'm here. So happy New Year, everybody.
I feel like the shirt or the robe you have on matches my hat.
Yes, it actually would go perfectly and cover up my bed head, but whatever. Anyway, first of all, yes, condolences. This is like a horrible, horrible situation to have happen. I dare I say it though, I think that these kinds of dynamics, that kind of tragedy, you can have positive experiences and you learn and you grow and you can make different choices for the future. And while many people in our industry have been significantly impacted by negative interactions with law enforcement on behalf of this plant, it's also time for us to be doing some healing and to start bridging the gap between law enforcement and our industry. And I think that this gentleman who was at his day of work as a police officer and came to, aid of one of our comrades in our industry, that's a sign of a law enforcement officer recognizing us as a community member and wanting to do his job, right? And so part of our job in building this new wave of the industry is to find our pathway to building bridges with people who have been on the opposite side of the fence with us for a very long time. Because when tragedies like this happen, the community needs to come together and not be pointing fingers and blaming. And law enforcement someday will hopefully be able to step back and say, no, these cannabis business operators, they're great community members. They donate to charities. They support us. They provide us camera footage when there's victims that have been victimized within the vicinity of their business to help us solve cases. We do that as a community. As business operators, most of us are incredibly ethical and want to improve where we live. And I think it's just time for us to really start bridging that gap and help law enforcement see the good in what we're doing, because there needs to stop being this us-them mentality.
Yeah, and you know what? It's interesting that you say that, Mandy, because I'm with you on that, and I think law enforcement needs to do that too. Because in the chat we have joined us Keith Healy. He's the owner of Fig Farms, and he actually has a full operation in Oakland. And he says, I've paid Oakland taxes. I've paid over $2 million in private security. The Oakland Police Union president calling for cannabis businesses to be closed is unfair. And he says the lack of police response has created this type of level of violence. What do you think about that, Chris?
Yeah, cannabis businesses, I won't speak for, all of them, right, or all of the operators, but many people feel like they're on an island and that, law enforcement is not coming. And that is based on data. That is based on historical non-response. And that's not a knock on law enforcement, but the fact of the matter is OPD specifically is incredibly low in the amount of officers they have. In my opinion, respectfully, I think the quality of police officer has drastically gone down. I saw that in my career, and I can speak to that as an expert because I was a field training officer. I completed daily observation reports with new recruits and, was to some respect like the gatekeeper to get into the department, although not making the final decision, which was frustrating because there was folks that, got into the department that I don't feel should have been. So there's, again, a whole bunch of layers to unpack here, and there's a whole bunch of different topics to sort of spin off of that I think are incredibly important, and it's just a lot to unpack here. So I feel let me just say this too, though. Mandy, I agree with everything you said, and I think that it's a two-way street. I think it's especially on law enforcement to come to the table. I think that in my experience within the cannabis industry, operators are willing to have dialogue with cops. They're willing to show up and have meetings. They're willing to, come to the table. Law enforcement is an incredibly encapsulated industry, and that's one of the frustrating parts that I found working within that cog. I think it's important that, law enforcement comes to the table, is open-minded, and understands that, listen, the world is changing. Laws are changing. These businesses are allowed to be here. Again, real quick example of that. I was a footbeat officer in San Francisco when a new dispensary opened up. I walked by, head nodded to the manager who had nodded back. I walked up, shook his hand, gave him my card, and said, I kind of kick it over here most days. If you need anything, let me know. He's like, hey, you want to come in and check it out? I said, absolutely. Can I? He's like, I don't know. Can you? And I was like, I don't have a warrant. Like, we were just kind of teasing with each other. He's like, come on in and check out my shop. Right. And you're a new retail business on a footbeat. You're on a piece of Market Street that I'm a footbeat officer. I leave that dispensary and my sergeant's in the middle of the street in his parked car in park. And he calls me over and he says, stay out of those places. And I said, no, not only no, but if that's how you really feel, shoot me an email, Sarge. Shoot me an email, shoot me a text, something that I can see and hold up, because you're going to make me stand at Gap the day after Thanksgiving all day long, and it's ridiculous, so there is a bias within law enforcement. I'm not speaking for the industry as a whole, but, these are just things that I think people eventually need to sit down and talk about. And I appreciate Mandy's perspective, and I think it goes both ways. I think that law enforcement needs to come to the table. I'm not saying that they're not, but I've yet to meet a cannabis operator that's like, I want some help, but I'm unwilling to, have the convo. I've never met that person.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since we had these rash of break-ins that started about 3 years ago, Oakland has been on the map as one of these primary targets. Mm-hmm. And we have covered stories like this. We've covered what happened to that cannabis business owner in Santa Cruz recently. And since then, Grant Palmer down in Santa Cruz has also been hit. And so the loss of life is never justifiable. But this notion that this market has become a mecca for crime, for cannabis businesses, there is some culpability with the lack of robust responses in the past. And again, if we're not utilizing the tax resources from the areas that do have clusters of cannabis businesses to staff those law enforcement to levels that will allow them to respond to those property crimes, that's a big misuse of those funds to begin with.
Yeah,
absolutely. I would just like to quickly add too. I think it's partly on the industry to understand that the circumstances are changing. Law enforcement's not showing up, so we can't continue to address security the way that we have the last 20 years. We need to. I'll just briefly say we need to lean into technology. We need to be open to chasing a different carrot. We need to understand that, the alarms, cameras, and guards are not necessarily the only answer out there. And it's important to, also from an industry perspective, address and understand that the times are changing and that there's a better way to do things. And certainly understand that, law enforcement may not show up, period.
Mm-hmm. And I think, oh, go ahead, Mandy.
I'm sorry. I want to talk.
Go for it.
I wanted to just also point out, though, that the city of Oakland and Emeryville, which is adjacent to Oakland, are like the top two most crime infected cities, I think, in the entire West Coast, but definitely in California
per capita.
and that's data from this year.
What two
So-
places are those, Mandy? I
Emory-
apologize, I missed that.
Emeryville and Oakland.
Emeryville and Oakland, and
Yeah.
they're right next to each other.
Stockton is right in there as well. They're like, I want to say those three are like neck and neck with each other for the highest crime rates. So it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that we're hearing about more of these instances coming out of Oakland. There's a high crime rate happening there already. I think a signing salary for anyone to join the Oakland PD is like $200,000. I mean, you're basically signing your life away, but Jesus, like
That's still lower middle class in San Fran.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought I would push that out there because I mean that is the situation. It's probably one of the most dangerous cities in California.
I feel like
most.
I feel like for operators that operate within the city of Oakland, they need to go to their city council and demand that the city council force the police department to treat cannabis businesses and their response time the exact same way that they would as an elevated response like a bank robbery. The city of West Hollywood has done that since its inception. Okay, and let me tell you something: when people have tried to break in during hours or even after hours, that people are getting caught. Okay, there was one guy that got caught.
I've seen law enforcement get dispatched to sit out front of Planned Parenthood to make sure the picketers don't get too invasive. But like now we're talking about actual gun violence on site at these facilities that have lots of staff and lots of money and lots of product. And it's just, I mean, it could be the same thing if you were a pharmaceutical company and somebody trying to target you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how often do pharmaceutical companies get
well, they
into
don't because they take insurance and that's a no cash transaction past safe banking. Rico.
Hey, Chris, is there a way that
drugs are worth a lot?
Is there a way that police can be incentivized legally incentivized for good behavior? If we're actually responding to stuff and like doing a great job, like I know like in the the mainstream world of capitalism, in sales, like you have incentives, for doing a great job. Like, is there any way that we can like legally, without pushing favoritism one way or the other, incentivize cops?
They do. They
beat,
measure response time to calls, and so there are metrics from a public policy perspective. And so the question I think for Oakland isn't what's the response time, it's are the responses commensurate with the threat, and have the responses been such that they extinguish the incentive for these professionals to continue to hit these locations in Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, and it is categorized by threat, and that's what I mean about leaning into technology. Currently, I'd say that most operators today, wake up in the middle of the night with an alarm call, right, from some dispatch center somewhere, and then they're on their phone looking at their cameras, and that's the typical way that I think a lot of operators that I hear about get woken up in the middle of the night if their facility's targeted, and those calls are categorized as priority 3 or a C, A or a 1 being the top priority. And so it's important to, again, I think, lean into technology to decrease police response times, in parallel to that, being able to provide real-time data, and that in and of itself will, I think, categorize calls to a degree that are higher priority. But in addition to that, that'll directly decrease police response times. And, I think a lot of, at least speaking to my clients, they just want the cops to show up, right? Cherries and berries. They want lights and sirens. They want to keep the offenders on the outside of the facilities, period. And there's a way to do that. And so I think it is important, though, and this is not an excuse for law enforcement, but calls are categorized by threat level based on the information. And typically cannabis facilities are relying on alarm systems to get that call out, and that will typically be a low priority call.
Exactly.
Did you just say cherries and berries?
Cherries and berries, bro.
Cherries and berries.
Yep.
I'm
You
thinking
heard that?
cherries and scaries. I don't even know what cherries and berries are. Where did this term come up? Help.
It's
I was 10 years
the
old.
police
It's one of
light.
those.
Young.
It's one of those.
Too young to know. We can't tell you yet.
It's just one of those
Yeah,
12
Yarrow.
special inside 12 comments. You know what I mean?
You and your Gen Z cohorts, Yarrow.
Mm-hmm. Chris, I have
Heard
one
that
more.
before.
One more like serious question in regards with this, and I just wonder how much of this has to do with at the same time. And I don't want to come across as being against criminal justice reform because I'm not. But the reality of is that some of these policies that have been put in place as far as not prosecuting people for these what they call small crimes or whatnot has led to a lot of this. All right. So for a commercial building, breaking into a commercial building in the state of California, do you know what happens if you get caught for the first time? You don't even go to jail. You don't even go to jail. Okay? You get informal probation. I don't even think you go to jail until the third time that you get caught. And after the sixth time is when you do up to a county year. And now this is the stuff that has to change within the policies, because otherwise it's a known thing on the streets that you can just go and rob any commercial business and there's basically zero punishment, because look, you can go and hit 10, 20 spaces, and if you don't get caught, you're winning.
Well, Jason, the reason why I'm against those, harsher punishments and everything like that, man, because you take a step back and look at the broader data. Like, black and brown communities get hit the hardest, period. You're going to have more black and brown people in jail for like 10, 20 years for breaking into a commercial building. So I think while we do need
I don't have a problem with people getting 10 or 20 years for breaking in commercial businesses.
Yeah, I think we should have firmer penalties. But on the flip side of that, this is indicative of a greater problem when it comes to the economy. These people that are doing these crimes do not have opportunity to make money to actually survive in these places.
Let me tell you something, bro. The people that are doing these crimes are trained professionals who are highly trained in this. Okay, it's not just
they're trained. It's not just like at this point.
Hold on, it's not just like the kids.
At this point, where they get started from, though.
It's not just like the kids that run into CVS and steal stuff, whatever they can grab. Okay, that's a totally different type of thing, and that goes into more.
Where do they get started?
About
They have to start somewhere, right? How do they get recruited into that cohort? Because they didn't have opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Hey, I mean, I'm not. It could be that. It could be they didn't have dads. It could be a lot of different things. You can't just attribute it to one thing.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It has to be a multi-pronged action taken by the community. You can't just have like harsher penalties. You have to have more opportunities for the people. And
I agree with more opportunities, but you got to have harsher penalties. I'm all for more opportunities in communities. I'm all for that, but there have to be real consequences for real crime.
Let me frame this for a second. Jason, I think what you're touching upon is this notion that because we have deprioritized law enforcement and consequence for property crimes, especially in California, that we've gone away from a culture of accountability.
Exactly.
And I don't disagree with you. And I think what Rico is trying to say is that while the laws on the books seem fair and equitable, the disproportionate enforcement of some of these crimes or these property theft enforcement against those crimes has still meant that these things are being borne on the backs of the poorest and often blackest and brownest communities, right? And so you've got these two separate things that aren't necessarily contradictory. And so Oakland has had issues before it had cannabis theft. And Oakland law enforcement respectfully has had issues before it had under responsiveness to cannabis crimes in the last 3 years, which we cannot say is entirely attributable specifically to Oakland. And I do not mean this as a disrespect to any of our men and women in blue or to the Oakland Police Department. But if you do your research on that organization itself, there's a reason why it was under federal receivership, and it is not exactly an organization that can say it has clean hands in the way that it has operated as an organization and the way in which it has interacted with the constituents it was tasked with policing. So there's a lot of room for improvement on a lot of different levels. And what Rico is trying to say is that the young men and women who tend to become these professional thieves, they start somewhere. And that starting somewhere, if we separate this conversation from poverty and the wealth gap in this country, then we are losing sight of the bigger picture, which is that people who have opportunity don't tend to rip and run and create crime. It doesn't mean that the crime is justifiable, but it does mean that there's a deeper societal issue and people are not necessarily given the opportunity to improve themselves. And it's not a level playing field in that respect.
Right on.
Great comment, Yarrow. Absolutely.